You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. Under the Puppet is made possible by the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who support the show over at patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. Welcome to Under the Puppet, the show that talks to professional puppeteers about the art and business of puppetry with the sole purpose of helping you up your puppet game. My name is Grandpa Choco, and this is Under the Puppet. Welcome to Under the Puppet. Today I get to interview the man behind one of the most recognizable puppets in the world. Paul Fusco is the creator and puppeteer of Alf. I talked to Paul about Alf, the puppet projects he created before Alf for Showtime, his series Space Cats, and much more. Here now is my talk with puppeteer and creator Paul Fusco. Well, Paul Fusco, welcome to Under the Puppet.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So excited to talk to you. My first question is, do you remember your first exposure to puppetry?
Actually, I do. It's so weird. I was like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years old, and I don't remember. It's either measles or mumps. Something that at that time they used to make you sit in a dark room for like a day or two until everything passed. And I remember my father brought me a box of hand puppets. And I was sitting in bed with these puppets, and I think that was my first exposure to puppets.
And were you instantly creating shows and things like that in your bed?
I think I was more interested in characters. I was like trying to figure out what these puppets were and where they came from and what kind of voice they had and that kind of thing. But just like a fanciful type of thing that passed the time when I was lying in this dark bedroom, not being able to see sunlight for 2 or 3 days, and they were like my companions. I think I kind of like I enjoyed it. They were hand puppets with moving mouths, and so I kind of like I always liked those kind of puppets as opposed to the Mr. Rogers type puppets where it's just a head and there's no articulation at all. Even as a kid, I never got that. They were like dolls to me. They weren't particularly puppets. I was always a fan of the articulation. I became even more fascinated growing up when I started to see ventriloquist figures. Most importantly, Paul Winchell, who had a big influence on my childhood. Big fan of Paul Winchell's, and actually got to be friends with Paul later years, which was really amazing. But if you remember, Jerry Mahoney had the closing eyes and the moving eyes and the moving hands. Paul did the thing where he put the live hands on the puppet, and to me that was like total magic. I was like, wow, that's just like amazing, just amazing. And then I grew up watching New York kids television, i.e. the Chuck McCann show. And Chuck also became friends with me in my later years. I was very fortunate in the fact that I got to meet a lot of my idols as a kid growing up, Paul Winchell and Chuck McCann. But anyway, Paul Ashley did these puppets that were part of the New York puppet scene, and I'm sure you know who Paul Ashley is.
Yes. Yeah.
And I was just blown away by those puppets because of the articulation. The eyebrows moved, the eyes closed, and the mouths, and it was like, to me, that was like the state-of-the-art puppetry at that time.
Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to see Chuck McCann work some of his puppets, some of his Paul Ashley puppets, and it's just amazing.
They're amazing. They're amazing. Did you ever put one of those puppets on?
He did let me hold one once, and it was very amazing. Yeah,
they're painful.
Yeah,
the way they're built, they're so painful. They cut into your hands, and it's so weird because Paul did a thing where the mouths are naturally open, so you have to put pressure on them to keep them closed. So it's the opposite of pulling down on a string to make a mouth open. It's pushing up to make it open. It's backwards, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. But anyway, Paul actually was a big influence too, watching that as a child growing up, and they did some pretty sophisticated things back then. I thought that I thought were funny, and but. I think your website about bringing back Saturday morning programs and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. That's how I got into this whole thing. Is I wanted to do children's programming, and I grew up with the Warner Brothers cartoons and the Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoons, which were basically cartoons for adults, and we watched them as kids because they were cartoons, but the humor was far above what we were expecting to understand at that time. And later on, as you got older and you watched these things again, you realized that these were pretty hip. They were pretty funny. They were above the kids' heads. And, I tried to do that with Alf, too, where we didn't want to write a kids' show. We tried to write it for adults that got the jokes that the kids didn't normally get. But that was basically my introduction. Is I wanted to be, my background is in television production, and I wanted to be I did local television. I did a local kids show with puppets, and I didn't really never expected to get into puppets, but it seemed to be my entree into that world, and I always felt that back at the time when I was trying to get my companies off the ground and doing these things with puppets. I said at the time, and I still think it today, there's really nothing out there for kids to laugh at anymore. I mean, kids are too into their cell phones or into video games or whatever it is, but laughter was a big part of Saturday morning. I mean, the Chuck McCann show, going back to that again, they did these shows for above the kids' heads, and we got it. But we laughed at it. And when I started to get back into this, I said, I want to do stuff that people, kids especially, could laugh at again, that they would think it's funny, that they're missing something. And I even think today, there's really, Saturday morning is practically non-existent now, but back in the day when Saturday morning cartoons were swamping the network, there was nothing really clever about them. I didn't think. I thought they were a lot of them were pretty badly animated too, because of for the budgets and everything. But it didn't register to me that they're missing something here. I always felt that they were missing something. I still do think that they're missing something. Kids are growing up too fast, and they're not spending the time to have fun and to be silly and to laugh. I think they're jumping right into these heavy-duty games, and I know the toy business has suffered a lot now because kids don't even play with toys anymore. Like the plush toy business is practically non-existent. Barbies don't sell anymore. G.I. Joes don't sell anymore. Kids don't play that way anymore. And I guess it's indicative of the times, but I think that they're missing out on something.
Yeah, I am right there with you. I agree 100%.
Yeah, I didn't mean to go on a soapbox on that, but it just kind of like never made any sense to me.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, because I'm of the generation of, I got to watch those Saturday morning cartoons and know.
Well, how old are you? I was going to ask you. Do you mind me asking that?
No, I'm 44.
Okay. So you grew up watching Saturday morning kids shows. You know what they were.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I did a show called Space Cats. I didn't know if you knew that or not.
I did. I have that on the list to talk to you about.
Okay.
A little bit later on. But I wanted to go back because you got into television production at a very early age, right?
I did. I was very, very fortunate that the high school that I went to had a complete television facility, and I think as a sophomore in high school, I was listening to morning announcements once, and I said, anybody wants to sign up to work in the TV studio? And like a bell went off in my head. What, TV studio? What? And I mean, that back then, that was just to be able to see videotape, to be able to do something immediately, watch it back. I was just boom in love with it. Television. I was a technical nut because I was always, I was fascinated by the special effects, the technical aspects of television, the equipment, and it was just, I knew my love was right there. I just kind of like was waiting for it to happen. That was it. That was what I wanted.
And one of your first major projects kind of on your own was getting a contract to create 6 Puppets holiday specials for Showtime. How did that opportunity come about? Puppets constantly crisscrossed my life because my main objective was I wanted to be a television producer, writer, director. That was my thing, television. I was doing industrial type of. I had formed a video company in Connecticut, and I was doing industrial type of videos for training things and stuff like that because that was my entree into it. But I ended up meeting a guy that used to work for the Muppets. He was a part-time performer for the Muppets, and he was a puppet builder.
and he had this puppet that he had these puppets that were built by the Muppets that he built with them, and I was just amazed by them. And what I liked, which is what Jim Henson liked, was I always felt that puppetry and television are the perfect blend of technologies and art, because I always loved the fact that your TV screen is your frame. Your puppet theater is the TV screen. And you could perform, again, under the puppet, you could perform everything that's outside of frame. Nobody knows. It's magic. And my entree into this world of performing was, I started off as a magician. And I think magic and puppetry kind of like always, puppetry was always the ugly stepsister of magic, ventriloquism and all that kind of stuff people always made fun of. But my background with magic was, when you do the puppets on TV, that's real magic now. I mean, because you're controlling what people are seeing, and you're controlling what they're looking at. So anyway, getting back to this fellow, he and I said, listen, I want to do something with puppets on television. I want to do something. So we put our heads together, and I said, we love the idea of these monsters and creatures and stuff like that. Kind of like going back to, I'll tell you what the history of it was. If you remember back early on in Saturday Night Live, Jim Henson did Saturday Night Live with puppets. Do you remember that?
Yes, right.
Okay.
Lana Gorch or...
Land of Gore, yeah. They only did 6 or 7 episodes because Jim hated it.
Right.
Jim hated getting up because it was all live. Jim hated performing at midnight, and the writers hated writing it. Well, anyway, that's a long story. It's another story. But getting back to... I'm all over the place with this, but getting back to Meeting Heroes, I also became friends with Jim Henson in his later years, which was great. So anyway, getting back to this, we were kind of mesmerized by that Land of Gorge, because that was the first time I ever saw puppets for adults. And we came up with this idea for a Halloween special. Creatures that were, we wanted to do a perennial. Our goal was to create the new Grinch Stole Christmas perennial TV show for the networks. We were very naive at the time. So we raised the money ourselves to do this, and built the puppets and shot it in a warehouse, and then took this we wrote it ourselves and took this finished product under our arms, and we, not even having an agent or anything, called up all the networks and said, hey, we got this television show we'd like to have you put on the network. But believe it or not, we actually got in to see the networks with a VHS copy in hand, or actually 3/4 inch at the time. That was 3/4 inch. And although it was not up to network standards, or not knowing that, you don't really put your money into a TV show and try to sell it that way. That's not how it's done. But we did get a little bit of recognition, and people kind of noticed what we were doing, and we got written up in a magazine, a cable magazine. We got my first cover with the puppets on it, and some guy called me from Metro Media Producers Corporation, which was trying to, at that time, supply programming to the new fledgling cable business, which was Showtime and HBO. And he said, they're looking for product. And he called me and he said he showed it to Showtime. Showtime loved it. And they said they want 6 more based around different holidays, and was I able to do it? And I said, oh yeah, sure, no problem. And ended up producing 6 holiday specials for Showtime. At that time, when Showtime had a children's division, Showtime in the afternoon ran kids programming. I think they called it Carousel or something like that. So that's how I got into it.
And did that kind of cement your path of like, well, I guess I'm doing puppets?
No, I still always wanted to be the director and producer and writer, and really didn't really have any inclination to want to perform, although I did get to experience, because I never wanted to see myself as in front of the camera kind of guy, but I did enjoy the fact that when I did a puppet, and of all these holiday specials, we did Christmas, Easter, Valentine's Day, 4th of July, Thanksgiving, and Halloween. I think that's 6. Anyway, I got to play these characters. I got to play Santa Claus. I got to play the Easter Bunny. I got to play this creature from another planet. So it was kind of like, wow, I could be as outrageous and as silly or stupid as I can be. As you know, as a performer, that's not your face up there, so you don't have to worry about embarrassing yourself, you know.
Right.
And it was pretty cool because, you know, I put that puppet down and it's like, I don't know, I have nothing to do with that. That's not me. But it was kind of cool. You kind of vent, and you kind of you're kind of able to take these chances that if that was my face up there and I was playing Santa Claus, or if I was playing the Easter Bunny and that was my face up there, I don't think I could have done it because I would have been too embarrassed. But anyway, it was fun. It was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed doing it. And I always felt puppetry always came easy to me. I don't know why, but I've always had a knack for it. I've always felt, okay, I mean, like, everybody can do this, right? It's like, you know, well, everybody thinks they could do it, but, you know, not a lot of people could do it well. But for some reason, it was just like, yeah, I put a puppet on my hand, I'll do it. It was like that kind of thing. So little did I know that later on it was going to end up haunting me.
Well, after the projects for Showtime, that led to a job at Disney, right?
Yes. Gee, you're good. You did your homework. Yes, Disney was coming up with a show called Dumbo Circus, and originally they wanted to do it with all puppets. So my connections through the business and everything, they had flown me out there to meet with me because they saw my specials on Showtime, and they ended up not going with puppets. They ended up going with they went with a producer that had done a show for them before that called Pooh's Corner or something, and that's what they understood, that type of production, because they were cranking these things out like 2.5 episodes a week. That's I think the order for a show like that at the time was 144 episodes, and you had to be efficiently producing these things. And as you know, puppets take time to do it right, and it takes a lot of money to do puppets right. And they ended up going with these big walk-around characters with articulated heads with a pre-recorded soundtrack. So I lost the job from being a puppet producer guy, but they had puppets in the show that were like background characters, and they said, well, if you want to stay on, you could stay on as a puppeteer. And I said, well, that's okay. It'll make me have to move out to L.A., which was great because I wanted to get kind of a footing in the Los Angeles kind of television arena. So I did. I was living out in L.A. I was newly married at the time, so my wife stayed back east, and I was back in California, going home every 3 or 4 weeks, and I ended up staying on that show till the end. I think it was a 2-year gig or 2 or 3 year gig.
After you finished working at Disney and that show ended, what did you have a direction of where you were going after that? Yeah,
at that time, I had a puppet that came out of the development of these holiday shows. When I had a puppet shop, and I was trying to sell another creature-based show, and the prototype for Alf was a puppet that came from this show. And I had this puppet with me, and I was using this puppet to sell the idea of the show. I would go into the meetings with this puppet and say, here's the character, here's what he's going to do. And the more I did that, the more I started to really focus not on the show that it was going to be, and it wasn't Alf, it was another show type of thing, but I kind of like would take this puppet out and bring it at parties, at Hollywood parties and stuff like that, and perform it. And we always got a huge reaction from it because it was the Alf character. And basically, I'd walk around the room with this puppet on my hand and insult people, and they got hysterical. So I realized, geez, I could do no wrong with this thing, you know. And so I came up with this idea. Okay, I like this character. What is it? Well, he looks like he's an alien, and you know how. So the whole, it's sort of like backwards engineered itself. That I started with the character, and I figured out who he was, where is he from, how did he get here, what's his thing, and I came up with the concept for Alf, of an alien that crashed into a family house, and wrote it all up. And at one of these parties, there happened to be an agent from CAA who was a friend of mine, and he saw this thing and he went absolutely nuts over it. And he said, "Tell me about it. What is it?" And I said, "Well," I said, "he's an alien." And he says, "This is amazing." He said, "We're going to take this out and we're going to." He said, "I'm going to sell this." He said, "This is a great idea," and that's basically the genesis of how Alf got to be.
Who built the original Alf, this prototype that you had?
The original prototype was built by Bob Fapiano, who was working for me. He and his now wife, Lisa Buckley, were a big part of my puppet team, and I actually brought them out to L.A. when we sold Alf, and Bob ended up doing the audio, the mechanics, the electronics for Alf, and Lisa was Alf's left hand.
Oh, great. And are you at all a builder? Does that interest you, or are you just more performing?
I did. At the time when we had the shop, I was in there with the rest of them, sewing and designing and gluing and getting high on barge. Only you would know that, right? Only a puppet builder would know that.
Well, the audience will know what that is.
Okay, but I used to like designing them. Bob and I would design them, and I'd do like a rough sketch, and Bob was an amazing sculptor. I always liked the soft foam puppets, and whenever we could do them, I would do the soft carved foam because I just always liked that look. And I did my time in the puppet shop.
Well, you have a very funny story about pitching Alf to NBC, and I'd love you to tell that story. But I'm also curious: did you pitch the concept of Alf to other networks, or was it just NBC? Oh, you did. Okay. Oh
yeah. We got into Disney wanted it in the worst way. Disney wanted Alf. They didn't own any networks at the time, but they wanted Alf. But we went to a couple of production companies at the time. We went with a big production company at the time was Whit Thomas Harris. They were doing Golden Girls at the time, and they liked the idea of Alf, but they wanted to change it, and I didn't want to change it. I said, no, this is it. So we moved on from there. Then we went on to ABC, and they hooked me up with Dale McCraven and his partner, who I don't remember his name right now, but they did Mork and Mindy. So they thought, oh, this is a perfect match because these guys they can write for aliens. Okay, so Carl Kleinschmidt and Dale McCraven. Those are the two guys. They were the writers and creators, I think, of Mork and Mindy. So their comment was, okay, well, we love this, but you know what? We want Alf to be a little bit more human-like. We want him to be able to, like if he were to go sit at a bar somewhere in the middle of the Midwest or something, people wouldn't know he was an alien. I said, well, that's not going to work because it's not going to be funny. It's not going to be. So that didn't work. And then there was another one. I wanted to make Alf more monster-like, realistic, with the saliva in the mouth, and I said no. And finally, they hooked me up with Tom Patchett, who had a pilot commitment over at NBC, and I was a big fan of Tom and his partner at the time, writing partner, Jay Tarsis, Patchett and Tarsis. I was big fans of their shows because I loved the Bob Newhart show, the original one where he was a psychologist, and I loved the show that they did called Buffalo Bill with Dabney Coleman, and they always had that edginess. So my agent took me to Bernie Brillstein, who was considered the puppet guy at the time because he represented Jim Henson, and Bernie was managing Tom Patchett at the time. So they said, oh, this is perfect. Bernie gets puppets. He understands puppets. And I pitched the idea to them, and they loved it. And Tom's sense of humor is pretty on line with mine. We have that same caustic type of sense of humor, so it was perfect. It was a marriage made in heaven. And the fact that Tom already had a backdoor pilot agreement with NBC, that was perfect. So we took it to NBC.
As the series evolved, how would you say Alf's character evolved from those early times just having him on at parties until you did 4 seasons of the TV show?
That's a good question. Alf had to start to have more emotions. It couldn't just be a one joke show where Alf comes in and does one liners and shtick and leaves. Because of the writing, there had to be stories where they wanted heart and they wanted Alf's emotions needed to grow. He needed to be angry. He needed to be sorrowful. He needed to be happy. He needed to be upset. He needed to be. So I had to find that. I had to find that with him, and it was fun finding it. It was a lot of fun finding it, if you watch the first few episodes of Alf, by 5 or 6 episodes in, I started to find it. The early episodes, Alf is a lot more gruff and more of a monotone, kind of a gruff kind of character voice. And I was finding that I couldn't deliver my lines all on the same level. It was just not only boring, but I couldn't find the cadence that I needed. I couldn't find the delivery that I needed, and it sort of came out of, well, first of all, because the voice was so gruff at the beginning that at the end of the show, I had a sore throat because I was like really straining my voice, trying to make him goes down here. It's like that kind of character. And if I do make a confession to you, I think in the back of my head, I think I modeled the original Alf a little bit off of Jim Henson's Rolf the Dog, because Rolf the Dog was, oh, tickling the old ivories here. He was that kind of character.
Yeah.
And I like that bravado, and I kind of like that. Well, I like that voice down there like that. So that's sort of who he was at the beginning, and not realizing that I could keep doing that and strain my voice and everything. So I had to find a middle tone for my voice, and it kind of just sort of happened. And once I found it, I was able to get into the higher registers and be able to bring him into that realm of of being more human and more reactive and more emotional and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I've heard you in other interviews say that there were times during the show where you had to remind the writers of the limitations of puppets in terms of what Alf could and could not do. Yeah.
I mean, I used to hate they'd come up with these hysterically funny premises, and at the time, the technology. First of all, as you know, it takes a lot of time to do this. It took us 2 days to shoot the show. We tried doing it in front of an audience first season. We couldn't do it because of all the stops and goes. But yeah, the writers would write these things, and I'd go into the writers' room saying, "How's Alf going to come into the room on a skateboard, eating a sandwich, and without it look horrible?" We didn't have CGI back then, and we didn't have it would all have to be mechanically rigged and everything. And yeah, so it was very limiting. It was very hard to explain to them. And we'd have writers, they'd be on the show 2 or 3 seasons, and I'd call and say, have you watched us do the show? Do you have any idea how we're doing the show? Have you been down on the set to see what it takes to do the show? So you're still writing stuff where they were like, well, we like to put that stuff in there to challenge you, to see if you can come up with something.
Geez, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Well, what's amazing about Alf is how long the character has endured, and what do you think it is about Alf that makes him that people love him even these years later after the show has been off the air?
I don't know. I really don't know. I think we just captured some kind of lightning in a bottle with the likability and the look, and I couldn't answer that. I really couldn't. I'm just lucky that it happened, but no, I mean, it's just something there. I can't figure it out.
Yeah.
People used to say to me after I did Alf, "Oh, that's why don't you do another one? Come up with another character. Why you should go on and do another show like Alf, but make another character." It's like, you don't understand. You can't just just whip something up like this and say, "Okay, here's the new Alf. Here's my new character. It's going to be it just caught on for some reason. It was a combination of a lot of things. It really was.
Yeah, that's like people saying, "Oh, we're going to make a viral video." And it's like, well, you can't make a viral video. You have to make a video and hope it goes viral. Exactly.
And at the time, we were the first time a puppet was put on prime time. Henson had tried to do it years before me, and he actually said to me, he said, "Congratulations, you beat me to the punch." He said he was a big fan of Alf too. He was really, really a really nice guy and a real gentleman. And he said, you finally did it. You got a prime time show. And I said, thanks to you. I said, it was your footsteps that I followed, and that people could understand that. But he tried to put the Muppet Show on prime time. It was never They could never do it. They ended up having to go to England and produce it, and then they sold it in syndication. They sold it, and they used to call it Prime Access. It was on at 7:30. It was before the network, so he never really got that. And then and then afterwards, there's been a lot of attempts to copy Alf or copy the premise or copy the idea of the stranger in the strange land or the alien or whatever, and they failed miserably. So I'm pretty lucky that I was able to hit it out of the park with him.
Yeah. Well, what I love about Alf is that you, as a performer, have lived with the character so long that he can basically be dropped into any situation, and he instantly has a point of view, and he can work there, whether it's like a 10-10, 220 commercial, Hollywood Squares, or even more recently on Mr. Robot.
Anything. It's hysterical because the writers, and we could say, the writers would just pitch this idea, Alf as a lawyer, Alf as Attorney General, Alf, and you just laugh hysterically because you just knew it's going to be funny. And no matter what he does, it's funny. It's the attitude that he brings along with the character. But you kind of know what you're going to get, and yeah, that's the fun part about it, because I used to say, no matter what he does, it's going to be funny. It's going to be funny. Trust me, he'll do it in some strange way that nobody will expect it to be done. But yeah, that Thad Mumford, one of the writers on the show, would call me into his office, and he'd have a list of things he'd just read off to me. He goes, that's why we ended up doing a lot of dream shows on the show, because they wanted to be able to explore this side of Alf, like Alf as President of the United States. So, I mean, how are you going to do that? Well, Alf has a dream that he's President of the United States, and wavy lines, blurred vision, and next thing you know, dreamy music, and here he goes, Alf sitting in the Oval Office. So we were able to do that. Alf is the head of a corporation. Alf is a lawyer. Alf is this. Alf is so, because they wanted to, they just said this will be hysterical. Alf is, so that's what we ended up doing. But it got to be, I think I put the limit on dream shows. I said only 2 per season, guys. We can't be doing a dream show every week because it's taking away from the premise of the show. But they were all chomping at the bit to do those dream shows. Yeah.
Well, Alf was such a hit, he spun off into an animated series and also a comic book. Were you involved in those as well?
I was, as much as I could be at the time, but we did. Those were our writers that we. Not the show writers, but writers that we worked with that, for the most part, the Marvel people were great, though. They had a good staff, and they really got the character. Those comics were really well written. They were very, very funny. But I think we did have a guy that would oversee a lot of the scripts and storyboards, and just to make sure that everything stayed in character and everything like that. But they got it. Those guys really got it.
Yeah. Well, another thing I find interesting about Alf, and just absolutely fascinating, is that you've managed to maintain the rights to Alf, because usually when you create something for a network, they own it outright or whatever. Was that just shrewd business acumen or luck or a bit of both?
No, at that time, the networks could not own the product that they were showing. There was a law in effect, which we were the last show where we owned the negatives and we owned the show, because they changed the law, and now they can own everything. But at the time, it was illegal. It was conflict of interest type of thing. That's why the movie theaters that were owned by Warner Brothers and Fox and everything, they had to dissolve the movie theaters because they were only showing Warner Brothers pictures or Fox pictures in those theaters. But at the time, we were like the last production company to own the actual show, and then that's one of the reasons why we got canceled. The law changed in 1990 when the networks were now able to own everything, and they started their own production companies, and NBC started up NBCP, which was going to start producing programs for NBC that they owned. And one of the shows that came out of NBCP was a show called Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And they had picked it up because they wanted to put it on the air because they wanted to own it and they wanted to make money with it. And they needed a time slot, and they took us off the air and gave the time slot, the 8 o'clock Monday night time slot, to Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. So that's one of the reasons why we got canceled, because they wanted to put their own show on the network. Mm-hmm. Even though our ratings were fairly good at the time, we were running out of steam with the family-type stories. That's why we ended the show on a cliffhanger where Alf was going to be caught into the military, and we ended up doing a movie of the week for ABC called Project Alf, which explained where Alf ended up. But if we had done another season, it would have been Alf trapped in the military in like an Area 51 where he's sort of like a Sergeant Bilko. They don't know what to do with him. He's a real pain in the neck. And, he's running gambling operations. He's selling DVDs underneath the table. He's got the chocolate concession. He's got, he's just this. They can't euthanize him, and they got, so you had these two sides that were saying, get rid of him. The other side, we can't get rid of him. And so anyway, he was just playing them for what it was. That's what our show would have been in the 5th season had we gone. Still keeping the family in there. They would come and visit him and stuff like that. But it would have opened up his world more and more people for him to play off of.
Yeah. Well, I love how protective you are of the character of Alf, and I've heard that you even went so far as to turn down a sponsorship deal from somebody like Coca-Cola because you didn't think it was right for Alf.
I turned down Budweiser, too. This was before Spuds McKenzie. Spuds McKenzie ended up taking Alf's job, but because Alf used to drink beer in the first season on the pilot, he drank beer. He was, he's 200 and something years old. He can drink beer. He likes beer. He found beer. So Budweiser picked up on that and said, "Whoa, this would be great. Alf endorses Budweiser. We got it made." And I turned them down. I said, I can't do that. I cannot endorse anything. We did a Burger King a thing, and I said we'll do the thing only under one stipulation. They made all these dolls, and they were going to have all these extra dolls, and they were going to give them to these kids in the hospital. Well, guess what? They sold out all the dolls in the first week. It was supposed to be a 4-week project, a 4-week promotion. It was a different doll each week for 4 weeks. So I forget how many thousands of dolls that they made, and I said, "You guys got to make more dolls." And I said, and I said, what is left over, we will make sure they get distributed to children's hospitals and stuff like that. Well, anyway, they didn't make as many as they said they were going to make, and they ended up selling them out. But my stipulation was, Alf is not going to be on camera. Alf's voice is not in this. It's Alf's likeness as a puppet that you're selling. I don't want Alf holding up a Burger King Whopper and saying, "Hey kids, eat this." I said, Alf doesn't hawk. Alf doesn't sell stuff. He doesn't tell kids to go out. And I turned down a breakfast cereal too, that they want to put Alf on the box, and Alfeos or some stupid thing they wanted to do, General Mills. And I said, no, it just grated me the wrong way. I know when Henson was alive and running the Muppets, he never did sugar endorsements and things that he felt were not wholesome with the Muppets. You never saw the Sesame Street characters hawking anything. You never saw any of his characters. Now, of course, that Disney owns them. The day was over when Bernie Brillstein called me after Henson sold the rights to the Muppets to Disney, and they put the baby Muppets images on diapers. And he said, "That's the end of the world." He said, "The Muppets are now on diapers."
Yeah.
And I kind of laughed, and I said, "Yeah." I said, "Jim would never had to prove that." And I was just always protective of that because I felt, kids trusted Alf. The kid, I didn't want him to be doing that. He didn't really need to be doing that.
Yeah. Well, it's great that he didn't need to and still be successful. Not that would have made him more successful, but.
Yeah, I mean, does it make a difference now? Should I have taken the money at the time? Sure. I mean, I was trying to stand up for something I felt, but in the long run, I don't think anybody gave a darn.
Yeah. Well, another thing I noticed when I was kind of Googling pictures of Alf and you, and that most of the pictures of you and Alf is like you're standing next to Alf or you're behind him and you have his hand on his shoulder, and there aren't any of you actually puppeteering Alf. Are you protective of that sort of thing?
Yeah, I was. We never called him a puppet, and part of that goes back to my background as a magician, that you never give away the secrets. And I used to get fan mail from these kids saying, "Dear Alf, I told my dad you're real, and my dad says you're not real because you're a puppet, and tell my dad he's wrong because I want to." And how do you tell a kid, "I'm a puppet kid, just leave me alone"?
Right.
I always wanted to predict. Not that what we were doing at the time was rocket science, because if you were into puppetry, if you really wanted to research it, you could understand how it's done. A lot of people thought it was a little person in a costume and never understood, well, how did he walk? How did are you? And it was the fact that they didn't know how it was done. They wanted to believe in the magic of him being real. And I wanted to keep that magic. So I always wanted to protect that. And I thought, I didn't want to really show how it was done and all the smoke and mirrors and lift the curtain and say, so the Wizard of Oz thing, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I didn't want to do that. I felt, what, if they're buying him as real, or some people buying him as real, let's just keep this a mystery and we'll move on from there.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I think that helps. It helps the believability of the character. You know what I mean? It's you just if Alf is on a talk show, it's unlike, not that this was bad, but like Jim Henson would go on, Arsenio Hall, and he's sitting there with the puppet, and you can see how it's all done.
Right.
But if Alf goes on, it's just Alf.
Right. That's the same with what Waylon Flowers used to do with Madam.
Right.
Yeah. I always wanted to keep Alf in the spotlight by himself and not be the guy behind the curtain.
Right. Well, I know you may not be able to go into too many details, but there have been recent rumblings that we may get to see more of Alf in the future. Is that true?
Yes, it is true. We're talking about doing an Alf reboot. So,
awesome.
Yeah. So we'll see where that's going to go. We're actively pursuing that.
Well, that's great. I know. I mean, just let alone in the public community, but even outside the public community, people are very excited when they're hearing that. So,
that's great. That's great. I think it's time. I think. Can you imagine Alf's commentary on this world? I mean, if you thought the '80s were crazy and hectic, they were kind of benign compared. I mean, Alf's just picking up the newspaper and reading the headlines. It's like, explain this to me. I don't get it. But it could be a lot of fun.
Well, you mentioned Space Cats before, and I wanted to ask you about that because after Alf, you created Space Cats. That it was animation, but it also involved puppetry. And I looked up the opening sequence sort of on YouTube, that big opening puppet sequence, and it's just so amazing with all the different cat puppets, and of course Charles Nelson Riley, who makes everything amazing. But was there ever a discussion to do the whole series with puppets instead of with animation?
Yes. The problem was money.
Yeah.
The budgets back then were very limited, and there was supposed to be more puppet stuff in those shows, but we just because of the financing, it was prohibitive. We didn't to do it right. People had grown up watching the Muppet specials, and Jim spared no expenses on those. I mean, when he did it right. He had the money and just the mechanics and everything were just perfect. So that was the standard to which I would hold this thing up to. And if I couldn't do it that well, I didn't want to do it. So unfortunately, we were not able to do that. But I did want to keep the writing in the same vein as like Rocky and Bullwinkle. So it was, as a matter of fact, we had a Rocky and Bullwinkle writer on that show who wrote the animation stuff, one of the animation stuff. So the animation was sort of hip, and the scripts were pretty funny, and the voices were pretty funny. So I did kind of get my way on that. I wanted it to be, again, this is the time when on Saturday morning our competition was like Power Rangers, and it was just bad stuff that was out there. And again, there was nothing on TV that I thought the kids could laugh at. So I wanted to do something silly and hip, and that's what the Space Cats came out of.
Yeah, well, that I don't know if legally that opening thing is supposed to be on YouTube on somebody's channel, but I was just so amazed by it. I was like, I wish, I was in college during that point, so I wasn't necessarily watching Saturday morning stuff, but I just fascinated with now, and that whole opening sequence is just amazing.
Oh yeah, and those puppets were beautiful. They were really, really, really built beautifully, and I really wanted to do more with them. And well, thank you, I appreciate that. But it had a great look. And the Captain Catgut character was a great character. I had a lot of fun doing that too.
Yeah. For many years, the shows you've worked on, like Alf, Dumbo Circus, Space Cats, so on, you wore a lot of hats. You're puppeteer, performer, writer, producer, and a lot of times just one of those jobs would be a tremendous amount of work for one person. How do you balance all those different roles on a show?
Well, it was hard. It was very, very hard because, especially with Alf, when I would direct an episode of Alf, and I'm the guy in the trench, and it's very hard to direct when you're down in the trench. But you have a good staff, you have good people helping you out, and pretty much know what you want. And I had a great support team that really protected me and were there for me and made sure that the technical aspects of the show were always kept in line and always made sure that everything looked right and everything. So it was grueling, it was very hard, but you just kind of do it. I mean, if you like doing it, I did enjoy directing and I did enjoy writing, and it just I would do whatever I could whenever I had the time. It was pretty grueling. It was a tough. We were only able to do 3 shows in a row, and we'd have to take a week off after doing 3 shows because everybody was just so burnt out. It was so grueling. It was so hard to do. It was so time consuming. It was so stop and go. Very frustrating for the actors, to be able to have to do scene by scene and pick it up in piecemeals and pick it up in shots and stuff like that. And but everybody knew what it was going to be going into it. It was it was all explained that this is what it takes to make this work. So, just got to bite the bullet and go forward and do it.
Did you have a role that, either director, writer, producer that you loved more than the other roles? Like this is what I really want to be doing.
I really enjoyed directing. It was fun.
Yeah.
It was fun. And I got to go on, I directed, there was another show that was on USA Network for a little while called Lost on Earth. I don't know if you know about that or not. It was a puppet-based show with live action, and they brought me in as a consultant on that, and I ended up saying, you know what, I'll stay and direct some of these. I directed, I don't know, a good portion of them, and that was a lot of fun because I no longer had to walk around with my arms up in the air, and I was able to. And the puppeteers, I knew all the puppeteers. They loved having me as a director because as a director, I knew what it took to do puppets, and I knew how hard it was for them when they had to be built into a piece of furniture or walk across the room with their hands up in the air. And I was very respectful of that, and they loved that because they knew. In the production meetings, I would be able to say, okay, this can be done, this can't be done. Here's this. This is how long this is going to take to do, and I just kind of like cut to the quick because I just knew what it would take, and they loved it. And I had a lot of fun doing it because I pretty much didn't have to do the puppeteering. I was just
right.
I was just sitting back watching it on a monitor.
Yeah. Well, what advice would you give to a puppeteer who wanted to start to develop a series or a project around one of their characters?
What advice would I give them? I think that a good idea is a good idea. I think if you have a good idea, if you have a great character that works, I think that's a big selling point with characters, with puppets, is the uniqueness of being able to do something that's fanciful and above and beyond what you can normally do. So I think if you believe in it and you really know, like I always knew that Alf was going to sell, and I always knew it was going to work. Now, that's not from me being cocky or being egocentric or anything. I just always believed in it. I always knew in my gut. I felt it. I saw the way that people reacted to the character, and I think if you have that, you're home free. I think if you believe 100% in what you're doing and you give it your best, and I think that's probably the best advice I can give.
Yeah. Are you still creating and pitching different projects yourself?
I was for a while. I stopped because it's so frustrating to sell anything in this day and age, even though there's 700 channels out there. And another big thing is, the budgets aren't there like they used to be. I mean, it's very, very hard. But I think if Alf comes back, I'll be back doing what I want to do and what I like doing the most, even though I know it's going to be a lot of work. But I think I would do it half for me and half for the character. I think the character deserves a resurrection. Like the character deserves a new generation of people and kids to experiment and see who he is and to explore who he is. So that's part of my impetus to do this, is to say, I'm doing it for Alf. I mean, I really do think that Alf deserves a shot at this, and that's what I probably would use as my mantra when I had to show up on the sets and say, "Oh God, do I really have to do this again?" But I did have fun doing it, I must tell you. And the most fun I ever had was anytime I could put Alf in a freelance situation where he's off the page. I mean, like Hollywood Squares was perfect. It just, he could say whatever you want. I mean, it was just, It was amazing. It was just, that was the most fun. Or interview shows where you could just, did you catch the Laura Spencer interview on Good Morning America? Did you ever see that?
No.
It's on YouTube.
Okay.
Alf is on. There's another one I did for NBC on the Today Show where they put Alf at the desk at the Today Show and had no idea what he's going to say, and these people are just like cracking up. They just Alf is just outrageous, and I half the time would not know what was going to come out of his mouth. It was just usually after the tapings, people would say, "I can't believe you said that," or I don't even remember saying it. It's like, well, just kind of like, you're a puppeteer, you understand. It's like when it's flowing and you channel a character. I mean, that was always the best. I mean, I used to do things like get ready to go on a show and say, I have no idea what he's going to say. I just don't know. And I was fearful at the beginning, thinking, what if I have nothing to say? What if I just clam up? Which my wife would always remind me, that never happens. But as a performer, I would always be fearful, like I might not have the joke. I might not have the line. I might not. But you know what? The challenge is always there. And when you just put them on and it's like, oh my God, I don't know where that came from. It just came out. So that to me was the most fun, and that to me is the joy of puppeteering. When you're in a character, and you just, I mean, I can understand what actors do, like the method actors, that they become that character and they do it through their person. That's such a great thing that when you can do it with a puppet, you can put this thing on, and through your hands comes this entity that's got its own life. I mean, it's magic. It really is magic, and that's going back to my background as a magician. That's maybe probably what appealed to me the most about puppets is it's magic. It's fantasy. It's watching an adult when I would put a puppet on and at an adult party or whatever, and watching their faces and bringing them back to their childhood and seeing what a puppet can do, what it does to them. It just, to me, that was always intriguing, and it still is. It's like I could put a puppet on or grab a bent figure and do something funny with it, and people are talking to the character. And to me, that's magic. That's a lot of fun. And that's how I knew when we sold the show to NBC, when Brandon Tartikoff was staring Alf in the eyes. I had Alf in the meeting, and Brandon was looking Alf directly in the eye. Now I'm sitting next to him. I can't really hide, but I've got Alf at a table, and it looks like Alf sitting at the table. He's right next to Brandon Tartikoff, and Brandon looking Alf right in the eyes, and he said to him, "So tell me, why should I put you on my network? What favor should I do you to put you on my network?" I knew we were home free because Brandon was talking to Alf.
Right.
He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to Alf, and Brandon became a kid at that time. At that moment, he was a child buying into this, and I said, "This is it. We're done. We're home free."
Yeah. Well, this has been absolutely fantastic, Paul. I just thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. I thank you for your diligence and your ability to keep the puppetry alive and to keep all these guys sparked, and who knows what the next generation is going to be.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Many thanks to Paul Fusco for being on the show. I'll have a link to a few of the things that we talked about in the show notes for this episode number 23, over at underthepuppet.com. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. I welcome your feedback via email at hello@SaturdayMorningMedia.com or via Twitter, where the show is at username Under the Puppet. You can also find the show on Facebook by searching Under the Puppet. I want to hear your suggestions for questions I should be asking and for future guests. Let me know who you think I should be talking to. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Talk to you next time right here on Under the Puppet. Music for this episode by Dan Ring. This episode was edited by Steven Staver. This show is a production of Saturday Morning Media and made possible by the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who've gone to patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media and set up a monthly pledge for as little as $1 a month. Huge thanks to Shay Stewart, Mern Lafferty, Jeff Peterson, Dale Gadania, Steven Staver, Jackie Klimo, Melissa Crawford, Dave Slusher of the Evil Genius Chronicles, Mike Coughlin, Dorothy Pachoco, John D., Kathy Crawford, Brian Greer, Carrie Whitney, Chuck Tomasi from the Technorama podcast, Chris Foster, Stephen Ing, Clinton of ComedyForecast.com, Vicky DeVries, Mike Wabshall, Twitter user Butts and Gear, aka Wildcat, Eve Cunning, Mike Hamilton, Gaston Moreno, Reed Loveland, Ivan Asquith, Vanessa Whitney, Peggy Etra, Kristen Hogan of Squid Friends, David Akers, Zoe Palladino, Ellen Multari, Christopher Harris, Rachel Jackson of Vox Fabuli Puppets, Carolyn Weisner, John Petty, Rachel Hansen, Darcy Prevost, Fernando Torres, Perlicue Magic, Ron McAdams, Jason Domer, Lee Barrett, Casino Skunk, The Misty Minute, Peter Capesser, Night Gig Studios, Joelle Rechtfertig, Adrian Rose Leonard, Earth to John Francis, RJ, Ginger J. Fitz, Megapodtastic, Paul Brunel, Jamie Hitchcock, Catherine Hannaford, Alan Gratz, Rachel Gibbous, John R. Donald, Jude Major, Miss Maudie and her buddies, Molly Smith, Phil Goodman, Emma Buntrock Muller, Jennifer Ballier, Nate Beagle, David Packman, and the Trivia Puppet Company. If you'd like to support this show and the other fun content from Saturday Morning Media, become a patron. Head on over to patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media and set up your monthly pledge today. You can also tell a friend about the show or leave the show a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. This show is copyright 2018 Saturday Morning Media, Grant Bachogo, executive producer, all rights reserved. www.SaturdayMorningMedia.com. You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.